There's a well-known story about Sir Moses Montefiore going up onto Har Habayis during one of his 7 legendary trips to Eretz Yisrael. But once we begin looking into it, we quickly discover that there are several versions of this story, each one telling it a bit differently. When he went up, why he did it, how he did it, and what was the rabbinic community's reaction. As we'll see, a great deal depends on who is telling the story. In this class, we'll return to the sources and try to piece together what actually happened. This is the first installment in a series about going up onto Har Habayis. Okay, so Rabbi Shlomo Aviner is a Rav in Eretz Yisrael, and he has a sefer called Piskei Shlomo. This one, volume 1, was published in Tafshin Ayin Gimel, that is 2013. And on page 258, he has over there the following question. Shaila, is it mutar latus b'matais me'al Har Habayis? Is it permitted to fly above Har Habayis in an airplane? Presumably the same question would apply to flying in a helicopter. Tshuva. The answer, one word, loy. It is forbidden. Why? Because the sanctity of the site goes all the way up to Shamayim, and he brings as a source a tshuva of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. This tshuva from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef in Charles Tshuvas Yabia Omer, volume 5, was actually written in the month of Sivan, Tavshin Chav Zayin, meaning a few weeks after Israel liberated Yerushalayim. So obviously that was a very relevant issue. It's at that point that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef writes this tshuva, and in this tshuva he writes that the Kedusha, he brings from sources obviously, that the Kedusha goes ad roim harakia, which is why there would be a problem in terms of flying over in an airplane. However, Rabbi Aviner then continues, and this is what's going to catch our attention. He says, as meret shoin, so I'll tell you a story. The yesh ma'aseh meforsim. There is a well-known story about the Sir Moses Montefiore, about the Sar, or in English, he was Sir Moses Montefiore. So before we read the story about Sir Moses Montefiore, the rabbi and his teacher, first a word about Moses Montefiore and his teacher. Moses Montefiore is one of the most famous, perhaps the most famous Jew who lived in the 19th century. His dates are 1784 to 1885. He was born in Livorno, to a family of Spanish Portuguese heritage. He was a well-known philanthropist, and what was unique about him is that for all intents and purposes he was a frum Jew. Many of the people who became major titans in the 19th century became very wealthy. They tossed away Torah and mitzvahs, but he remained a loyal Jew. He was knighted by Queen Victoria, hence the term Sir, and he is most famous, I think, for his 7 trips that he made to Eretz Yisrael between the years. The first trip was in 1827, it's before steamships. This was a very difficult trip for him to make. His last of 7 trips was in 1875, so over a 50-year period, basically, he went to Eretz Yisrael 7 different times. So this is a brief word on Moses Montefiore, and everything that we're going to be learning today is going to revolve around him and a story that involves him. Now we have mention here of his teacher. Who's his teacher? So when he would travel, he would go together with his secretary. This was a fellow by the name of Eliezer. He was widely known as Louis, and that's because he grew up, he was a major Talmud Chacham. He learned by the Chassam Sofer, learned in the yeshiva of the Chassam Sofer, but later he became an academic. He went to universities, he got advanced degrees, and he was a Melumid. And it was good for Montefiore to have someone like that around. If Montefiore needed someone to read the letters that came in, all the poems that were in Hebrew that were written to him, and the letters, and to understand what's going on in the Jewish world. And so he was a very, very useful person for Montefiore. And so Montefiore had him as his secretary. Sometimes he was called his rabbi, his personal rabbi. And in at least some of the travels to Eretz Yisrael, he took him along with him. So what's the story? So we have a famous story of Moses Montefiore and his teacher, that's Louis Lowy, where they went, they went in some sort of compartment into Makam HaMikdash. Shenasim Goyim, and non-Jews carried it in. V'Rabbanei Yisrael lachu shofar. So, Rabbanei Yerushalayim, the rabbinate, the rabbis of Yerushalayim, they took a shofar. V'takhu bechutzes Yerushalayim, and they sounded this shofar in the streets of Yerushalayim. V'nidu es hasar, and they excommunicated him. Here they're taking the most famous Jew, the one who, according to the story, keeps on coming every few years to Eretz Yisrael, is basically funding the whole operation over there, and they put him in Nidui. Uviyois hasar yarei Hashem oid, because he was a God-fearing Jew. Pana yachad im rabbi or Rabbanei Yerushalayim, so he together and his teacher, they interceded with the rabbis, v'yisnatzlu, and they apologized, ki yasuzais betum levav. They did this innocently. Why innocently? Al pi heter haravid, because of the heter of the ravid in Hilchos Beis Abchira Perek Vav. More on that in a second. The Rabbanei Yerushalayim piyasu oisam. So then the rabbi said, okay, we'll make you feel better. And it doesn't even, according to the story, say that they removed the excommunication, but I think that's the implication of the story. And he's saying, and the end of the story is that everyone lived happily ever after. Now, we're going to have some questions about this story, but before we go to the story, first we want to understand what's the ravid. What's the ravid over here? What's the heter of the ravid? So here is the sugya. We actually touched on this a while back. We did a shir on karbanis bezman hazeh with Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer, and so this sugya is an adjacent sugya and is an adjacent topic, and so let's go. So the Rambam in Hilchos Beis Abchira Perek Vav says as follows: Makrivin hakarbanos kulon, af al pi she'ein sham bayis banei. It is permitted to bring all the karbanos even without having a built Beis Hamikdash. Va'oichle kachei kadashim b'chal ha'azar, and likewise we could eat the sacred foods which can only be eaten in the Beis Hamikdash in the Azara. We could eat it in that location now, af al pi she'ei chareva, even though we don't have the Beis Hamikdash. Why? L'chayre, we don't have the Beis Hamikdash. So if you don't have the Beis Hamikdash, the place doesn't have the sanctity. If it doesn't have the sanctity, how can you bring the carbon? It's like shchutei chutz. It's like not in the Beis Hamikdash. Or how could you eat food that needs to be eaten in the Beis Hamikdash? It's like you're not there because we don't have the Beis Hamikdash. The reason is shektusha rishayna, the initial kedusha that happened when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael the first time with Yeshua ben Nun. Kitcha l'shaita, it was effective then, but also v'kitcha la'asalavai, it was also the sanctity took hold for the entire future as well. Now there's a big chiddush here of the Rambam, because the Rambam actually paskins that we actually don't say this about the first kibush. We don't say this about Yeshua when it comes for Trumos, and when it comes for Maasros, and when it comes for Shemitah. We don't say this. The chiddush of the Rambam is that although we normally don't say it, we will say it for the Beis Hamikdash and Beis Hamikdash only. Why? The kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim is because of the Shechina, and well, Shechina is a different ballgame. Shechina ain't a betela. Once it's there, it's always there. It doesn't go away, and so therefore it has the full sanctity of the Beis Hamikdash and the Azara and everything, even without having the Beis Hamikdash there. And then he brings a Gemara, where the Gemara darshans a pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'ashim lo'yis mikdashechem." That's in Vayikra Perek Chavav, where I am going to destroy the Mikdash. So the Chacham and Darshan, Af al pi she'shoymeimin, even though that they're destroyed, it's still called a Mikdash. Even as Vahashi Moisi is true, it's still called a Mikdash. And so here the Rambam says, you see that this is an exception to the rule, and therefore the initial Kedusha from Kibush Yeshua is going to pertain to the Beis Hamikdash. This is what the Rambam says. Obviously, what follows from here is that all the limitations about going in to where a zar cannot enter, or someone who's tamei cannot enter, all those things, according to this shitta, would still hold even today without having a Beis Hamikdash. However, then we have the Ravid. And the Ravid, in numerous instances, he disagrees with the Rambam, including here. And what he says, Svaras hatzma hizu v'lo yadati me'ayin loy. This idea that you separate off the Beis Hamikdash from the regular din, that's your own svara. And I don't know where you got it from. Normally we don't take that position. Normally we take the position that the initial kibush of Yeshua was effective in its day, but then it fell apart. When you had the first Churban, it fell apart. So the idea that you say some places yes, some places no, Svaras atzma yizu v'lo yadaiti me'ayin loy. Okay. However, then the Ravid goes further. He says another thing. V'lo yoid, I'll tell you more. Then there's 1 second, because even if you say the first kibush isn't long-lasting, isn't relevant today. But 1 second, what about the second kibush? The second kibush, we actually normally do hold that the kedusha rishona is something that's kitchel asalave. That's normally how everyone paskins, including kedusha shniya is la asalave. That when Ezra came and they took back control of Eretz Yisrael, so that's something that still sticks with us till today. So what about that? Says the Ravid, that even that, I have something to say about that, though. It's going to lead us to say that actually the Beis Hamikdash is not a Makam Kaddish anymore. Why? Even according to the Shitta of Rabbi Yossi, which is the normative view. Who says that Kedusha Shniya, that is the time when Ezra came. That is something that outlasted the Churban. La Yamar, he only said it l'shar Eretz Yisrael. He said it for Eretz Yisrael, for all of Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't pertain to Yerushalayim, it doesn't pertain to the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because here he says a very interesting thought. Because Ezra knew that the Mikdash in Yerushalayim, Asidin Lishtanois, is going to change. In other words, he knew that one day his building, their project, Bayesheni, is going to go away. Lishtanis is going to change. Uliskadesh, Kiddush Achar, Oilami, B'chvei Hashem Oilam, and one day it's going to be sanctified with the Bayesh Shlishi, the Geula Shlema, a whole nother level of Kedusha. And so Ezra is like, once this goes away, why should I make it a Kedusha La'asid Lave? No, I'm going to do it for now, for the next few centuries, as long as the second Beis HaMikdash is operative. When that goes away, what's next is something otherworldly, something godly, something whatever. So why should I? No, so I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it la'asid lavai. And so therefore, he had in mind that it's only as long as the Beis HaMikdash lasts, but it's not for Zman HaGolus. Now, where do you get this from? So the Ravid criticized the Rambam and said, Svaras Atzmahi, right? Well, guess what? The Ravid here is going to concede that it was Svaras Atzmahi. This is also his own idea. It's not like there's a clear makar and shas for this. But what he does say, something very interesting that's really a topic for itself, and that's the following words: Kach niglali misoid Hashem lireah. This is what has been revealed to me, which is what Hashem reveals to people who are Yirei Hashem. The Ravid uses language like this on a few occasions in Mishnah Torah, where he uses a lashon like Koifia Ruach HaKodesh Bebeis Midrashenu, and this language over here. And one question is, what does he mean? What does it exactly mean by these words? A second question is, how does this work with Psak Halacha? Both of these are very valuable questions that are not, and one of them we touched on in a previous class, paskening based on dreams, so we're going to leave that alone. But the bottom line is, the Ravid now concludes, based on that, Kedusha Rishayna. What do you mean? We that was for sure batal, he says. No, the Rambam came up with a chiddush to say it sticks. But really, Kedusha Rishayna, Yeshua is not relevant. Kedusha Shniya, well, you would have thought it's relevant, but I came up with an idea that it's actually not relevant. So now the bottom line is, there's nothing that made the base. It's like go back in time to before the Yidden came to Eretz Yisrael. Could you walk on Har Habayis? Could you walk on Temple Mount? You could walk on Temple Mount. Zar, Tuma, Tara, doesn't matter. You can walk there. So the same way that was true before Yidden came to Eretz Yisrael, the same thing would be today. He concludes therefore saying the following words: L'fichach hanichnas ata sham. If you go there now, aim by carts. Now he doesn't say mutter, interestingly, but he does say aim by kares. There is no kares. So normally, for someone, a tamei mace, to go into the place where he's not into the Azara, for example, that would be a din of kares. And this is not, kares is not relevant today. Okay, so this is a major machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid. I need to highlight, this is a complex sugya. There's a lot that's been said on this, but the bottom line is what we need, we have. And that is, according to the Ravid, you could see, someone could read the Ravid as saying that it's permitted to go on Makam HaMikdash today. And so according to the story, the Rabbi Aviner told us that after they were put in Cherem, or Nidui, they went and they said, we did it, al pi heter Ravid. Okay, so they did it. So then, according to the rabbis, must have told them, heter Ravid is not, okay, we'll see more as we move along of what the response to that would have been. But the bottom line is that it all worked out. Everyone lived happily ever after. Okay, so here's the questions that I would like to discuss today. Question number one: if it is true that they went according to the heter or the Ravid, then why do you need to go in a hot air balloon? L'chayra, you're relying on the Ravid. You wouldn't need that shida teva migdal. That's question number one. Question number two: the whole idea of going in with a non-Jew holding you up in a shida teva migdal sounds like a laughable idea, because you're not allowed to cause a non-Jew to go b'makam hamikdash. So what did you really accomplish by hiring a non-Jew who otherwise wouldn't be going there right now for sure, and you're paying that person to be there and to hold that? So that sounds like a problem as well. Question number 3 is it really the case that they took the most important philanthropist who was funding all of Eretz Yisrael and put him in Nidui? Question number 4, is it true that indeed he came and started pleading and he said, I'm sorry and all that? Is that true? And more generally, we'd like to know as many details as possible about this story. So that is our goal. And with that, let us begin the journey. Okay, so first up, we're going to look at a source from 1928. Obviously, Rabbi Shlomo Aviner is writing very recently, so we want to get as close as possible to the time of the story to actually learn, to the best of our ability, what actually happened over here. So there was a rabbi who, his name was Rabbi Yehuda Noach Braver. He grew up in Eastern Europe, and like many, he came to Eretz Yisrael. He writes a little sefer called Shar Dalsei Halavonin. And what is this contrast about? It's B'She'elas Heter going on to Har Habayis. In 1928, this is what he is writing. And all the way at the end of this book, he tells us the Montefiore story. So let's read the version of the story the way he has it. Nitzadek es hatzadek. I'm going to justify the tzaddik, the Sar Moses Montefiore, and Rabbi Dr. Lowy, the Maisa with a story Shehuva b'Shivchei Yerushalayim. This is a mistake. It's Sharei Yerushalayim. That's the name of the book. Sharei in the section called Shivchei Aretz. So we're gonna make this good. We're gonna explain how what they did was essentially okay. Why? So here he says Shebeshnas Tafresh Chav Zayin. Okay, here he gives us a year. The year was 1867. Nichnesu Hema L'Makayim HaMikdash. They went into the place of the Beis HaMikdash. Now V'Rav Echad Kafatz V'Nidoisam. It was one rabbi who jumped up and put them in Nidui. So we're learning some more details. We learned the year. We're learning according to this that it was one rabbi who put them in Nidui. Then they turned to the Roshei Harabanim who are in Yerushalayim. They're Rabbi Meir Orbach and Rabbi Shmuel Salant. And they apologized that they went in al pi heter haravid in Soif Perek Vav and Beis HaBchira. Okay, we know what that is. Then, listen to this, according to this report, those rabbis then, they comforted them, saying what? Don't worry about the Cherem. Cherem, Harav, Hanal is Batalu Mavutalu. That excommunication is nullified. It's dead on arrival. Why? Because he did it without permission. He did this in a haste way, without permission. What does that mean? This is what they meant to say. This is Rabbi Braver is telling us what these rabbis meant to say. The Ravid says there's no chorus. But at the same, he didn't say v'lachem mutar lechatchila. So therefore, it is true that you're not allowed to go lechatchila. Makom makom. What is the nature of this iser? What is the nature of this prohibition? It's only midarabanan. According to the Ravid, it's only midarabanan, and the gedar of the iser is moire mikdash b'churbana, and that is that even when the Beis HaMikdash is no longer here, we need to have reverence for it, and part of the reverence for it is not to go there for no purpose. So that, if you understand the Isser in that way, so then loy shayich b'makayim dechavanas hanichnasim ha'yelachaberes hamikdash. Then, if you're going to honor the Beis HaMikdash, then there's no Isser. Because again, what's the Yisrael of Isser for him? Is it the issue of Tumah going into the Beis HaMikdash? Or no, it's none of that. It's very simple. It's a rabbinic Isser that says you have to have reverence for this place. How do you have reverence? Stay away. Okay, but if you're going to honor the place, so then lechatchila, there's no Isser. The Isser is only done if you're doing it in a useless way. Okay, so why was it okay for them? They went to be mechabed the mikdash. He says, yeah, ki yadua, everyone knows. Because they thought then that they wanted to purchase the Makom HaMikdash and to build the Beis HaMikdash. So they're doing it for the benefit of the Beis HaMikdash, so the Isser D'Rabbanan doesn't apply. And that's what the rabbis there said. When they said it's a silly ban, what they meant is it's a silly ban because you didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you did a very nice thing. So basically, according to this report over here from Yehuda Noach Braver, is it true that there was an excommunication? Yeah. But who declared it? One random guy. And the great Rabbanim, they didn't endorse it. And to the contrary, they actually supported what Moses Montefiore did. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Noach Braver tells us that he's getting his information from the Sefer Sharei Yerushalayim. Now I can tell you, this story does not come from Sharei Yerushalayim. None of this is in Sharei Yerushalayim. Where is he getting this? And we'll see Sharei Yerushalayim later, and you'll see it's a very different account. So where is he taking this from? The place where he is taking this from comes from a book that was published about 10 years before, in the year 1919, in Hoboken, New Jersey. There was a rabbi, an interesting fellow, his name was Reb Chaim Hirshenson. And he grew up actually in Eretz Yisrael, but he made his way eventually to America. He was a big macher in Mizrahi. He was born in Elul of 1857. That's going to become important information in a few minutes. And again, in 1919, he's here in America, and he writes a book that is called Malki B'Kodesh. And here he tells us his memory. V'zachrani, I remember, b'yosi od yeled ben achas esrei shana, when I was a child of 11 years old. When the Sir Moses Montefiore came for the 6th time to Eretz Yisrael in Shnas Tov Reish Chav Zayin in the year 1867. That's the same year that Rabbi Braver gave us. And as you're going to see, as we're going to read along, you're going to see the parallels between Braver and Hirshenson are very noteworthy. Okay, and I heard then that he went in to the Makam HaMikdash together with his teacher, Dr. Lowy, and then in Yerushalayim there was a man, and he gives us the name of this man. His name is Yosef Moshe of Lisa. This Yosef Moshe of Lisa, in a minute, he's going to tell us, was the son of Rabbi Yaakov of Lisa. Rabbi Yaakov of Lisa is the Nesivis. The Nesivis, he lived in the early 1800s, a very famous commentator on the Shulchan Aruch. See, he wrote other Sfarim as well. And according to this account over here, he has a son whose name is Yosef Moshe. And Yosef Moshe is in Yerushalayim, and he's the one who takes the shofar and he sounds it and he proclaims a nidui to the Sar, to Moses Montefiore b'chutzos Yerushalayim. Now, because Montefiore was Yirei Hashem Ha'od, so he and Dr. Lowy, they went to the Rabbanim of Yerushalayim and they apologized. And they said they did it al pi heter aravid. Okay, we know what that is. The Rabbanim made him Vayanachamum Rabbanei Yerushalayim. They comforted them, and they said that the cherem of Rabbi Yosef Moshe is like a cherem shel yam. This is a pun. Cherem shel yam is a language from the Mishnah and Masechtas Nedarim, where someone makes a neder, and one of the ways you can make a neder that you're not going to do something is you could say the word cherem. Cherem means it's off limits, so you're not allowed to do it. What happens? Someone says, yeah, I know I said cherem. Cherem on me that I'm not going to do it. But then he says cherem could also mean a trap. You go out to sea and you catch fish in a cherem in Lashon HaMishnah. So he's like, I just meant a fish trap. I didn't really mean a thing. So the din is that then it's not a real binding neder. So that's very good for the purposes of the writing over here, that these rabbis are purported to have said that it's cherem shel yam, meaning just like that neder is a nothing neder, so too this cherem is a nothing cherem, and cherem shel yam, yud mem, stands for this Yosef Moshe. So it's cherem shel yam, ki yam ze gadol b'yichusay, although this Yosef Moshe has yichus, because he is the son of the Goin, Rabbi Yaakov and Elisa, the author of the Derech HaChaim. And we said before the Nesivis, avalei nenu shafa bedaita, he isn't all there. He's not responsible for his actions. Okay, so this is the story, and you can see over here pretty clearly that Rabbi Braver is taking the story from here, from Reb Chaim Hirshenson. The details match up pretty well. He then goes on to say that his father told him that if Moshe Yosef would have been normal, then he would have been liable to receive a punishment. Why? Because you can't proclaim a nidui when other rabbanim are there. So that's true. But at the same time, he says Dr. Lowy was wrong. Why was Dr. Lowy wrong? Because the Ravid doesn't allow you to go on lichatchila. He only says that there's no isakaris. But he doesn't mean that lichatchila you're allowed to go in. And the way he says it, there's an iser midrabanan. Exactly the way Rabbi Braver wanted to argue that there's only iser derabanan. So too here, Chaim Hirshenson says his father said there is an iser derabanan ladas haravid, which is why Lowy's heter, so to speak, isn't such a good heter after all. Okay. Two comments that we walk away with from what we have so far right now. What's the common denominator between these two passages? Was there a nidui? Absolutely, there was a nidui. But at the same time, the whole isser and the whole problem in both of these texts is very, very much belittled, very, very much downplayed. In fact, in the first one, Braver puts into the mouths of the Rabbanim in Yerushalayim where they said, you did good. We would have done the same thing. If you're going to build the Beis HaMikdash, then it's only you went in for the Beis HaMikdash is covered. You went in for the covered, then there's no isser. And according to that, the Ravid is right, and we don't paskin like the Rambam B'chlal. We paskin like the Ravid, and it's only Issa the Rabbanan. And if you're going in for Kavod HaMikdash, it's fine. That was for Rabbi Braver. And Chaim Hirschison did not say that. But does he have at any point the rabbis saying that there was an Isser here? No. He has his father saying there was an Isser. He doesn't have at any point the Rabbanim in Yerushalayim saying that there was an Isser. And both of these rabbis tell us it was only one rabbi that put him in Nidui. Rabbi Hirschison says the guy was crazy. And so what you walk away with from these two sources, and we'll talk more about this as we move along, is in these two sources, yes, there was a Nidui, but then at the same, which is like very serious, but at the same time, the whole thing is not such a big deal. It's not, like, don't worry, this story is not such a big deal, and hold on to that thought as we move along. So that's number one takeaway from these two texts. Another thing, and here we're going to quibble a little with numbers over here. Clearly, Hirschenson wants us to know that he remembers his story. He says, I remember, it was 1867, I'm 11 years old, whatever. So the first thing, if you do the math, you actually check when he was born, even by his count, he wouldn't have been 11. He wouldn't have even been 10. He would have been 9. But in addition, Montefiore actually didn't come on his 6th trip in Tafresh Chav Zayin. He came in Tafresh Chavot in 1866. So the bottom line is, his Hirschison would have been 8 at this time. So it's just something I know he really wanted us to know, that he remembers his story very, very well. I think we need to sow some doubt about that, and as we're going to move along, I'm going to do more sowing doubt into this specific detail. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to show you one more source that I want to put into this category. It's going to do both things. On the one hand, it's going to tell us there was a nidui, which is one of our driving questions. We want to know, is it true Moses Montefiore was put into Nidui, Cherem, whatever you want to call it, for this? So I want to show you another source, and this is actually going to be the earliest source that I know of that actually says he was put in Nidui, so we're going to have that. But then at the same time, the overall feeling that you're going to get when you read this source is the same thing. It's like, don't worry, not a big deal, this wasn't a serious thing at all. Who's this going to come from? Very famous individual. His name is Eliezer ben Yehuda. He's famous for the modern Hebrew language. In the 1880s, he had a newspaper in Eretz Yisrael that was called Hatzvi, very controversial figure. This is before, this is in 1884, it's before most of the controversies associated with him come out. Anyway, so in his newspaper on the 31st of October, 1884, it is Cheshvan time. And Montefiore is still alive, celebrating his 100th birthday. And so in Eretz Yisrael, everyone's celebrating and the newspapers are writing about it. This is a big deal. Montefiore turned 100. This is a very, very big deal. And so here they have a write-up of some of the stories that are going around that people are saying. And this doesn't have a name next to the article, so apparently it's Eliezer ben Yehuda himself who wrote it. He says like this: there are many stories that people in Yerushalayim are saying about the great Moses Montefiore that they seen on his 7 trips when he was here in Yerushalayim. And here is 2 of them, and he's like, I'm going to give you 2 of them, and here's the first of the 2. He says, once upon a time, Moshe went to go see the mosque that the Arabs have on Makam HaMikdash. Jews are careful about going there because of a chashash of tumah, interesting language. But anyway, okay. And there were some people there who put Montefiore into Cherem because of what he did. All right, so here you have a source from 1884. This gets you much closer to the events. It's telling us that indeed there was a Cherem proclaimed. Vayivad alai hadavar, and he found out, he asked who are the names of the people. I guess it was more names according to this account, more people than one that put him into Cherem. And the next day he had an aliyah. He had an aliyah, and he commanded to make a misha berach for everyone, to make a bracha for all those people, all those names, because their kavanah was l'shem shamayim. Okay, so what's the feeling that you get when you read the story? Like, he's not concerned. You know, they put me in Cherem, they meant well, I'm in good shape. There's no crisis over here. And so you really, all 3 of these sources, I think, fall into the same bucket. Yes, there's a nidui, no crisis. This is not a serious thing. No one seems too concerned about this. No one serious, including Montefiore or anyone else, seems too concerned about this. That's in terms of these 3 sources. However, there are other sources that talk about this story, and we're going to see they pull in a different direction. And hopefully by looking at all these, we'll try to get as close as possible to the truth. So the Av Bezdin in Tveria in 1930, his name is Yaakov Chai Zrahan. Anyway, he has a tshuva that he wrote to Yehuda Noach Braver. Remember, Yehuda Noach Braver wrote the whole story up and said it was a non-issue, and the Rabbanim actually agreed with him because he went in for Kavod HaMikdash. Well, this Rabbi Yaakov Chai did not appreciate this. And he says in a tshuva, Ibcha ani shamaiti. I heard the opposite. Who did I hear it from? I'm reading number 7. I heard it from Har Habayis Shlomo Rachmem Abulafia. And he is the son of the Rishon Litzion, Reb Chaim Nissim Abulafia. And Chaim Nissim, the Rishon Litzion, lives in Yerushalayim, so he's on the scene. And he heard from his father. So Shlomo heard from his father, Reb Chaim Nissim, that Hasar Nisker Moses Montefiore Kibal Olavas Hadin Lifnei Arabanim Agoinim, that he accepted the fact that he was wrong in front of the rabbis. V'asa Kama Tikunei Karis. And in fact, he did some tshuva, he did some tikunim that we do when a person violates a prohibition involving karis. And so don't tell me, he says, that the rabbi said, you're good, it's okay, it's fine. In fact, it was mutter. No, to the contrary, he was extremely remorseful, he was extremely upset, he was doing tshuva, and I rather rely on this, he says, because he's an Eid Re'iyah ala Ma'aseh Be'etzem. We have Reb Chaim Nissim Abulafia, who is an Eid Re'iyah. He was there, he was the Rishon Litzion, he was in Yerushalayim, he knows what was going on. Now I should point out, I don't know if dates bother you, but Reb Chaim Nissim Abulafia passed away in 1861. So if you're going right now with the 1866 date, then there's going to be a problem. But the reason you shouldn't worry about this is because, as I'm going to show you, this story did not happen in the 1860s at all. It actually happened in the 1850s, and very much Reb Chaim Nissim Abulafia was very much present, which makes Reb Yaakov Chai's point very cogent. He was there. He knows there was remorse. Don't give me this narrative about the rabbis buying into the story. A similar source we get from Reb Shalom Leib Eisenbach, who wrote in a rabbinic journal called Vayalaket Yosef, which came out in 1911. And he tells us that he heard from Har Habayis Reb Aryeh Leib. I did not look into who this Aryeh Leib is. But he says, I heard from him that, you know what's interesting about Reb Shmuel Salant? Moses Montefiore loved him. And he respected him. And anything that Reb Shmuel Salant wanted in Yerushalayim, Moses Montefiore was in. Where did it come from? How come it happened? He says the reason is because Shmuel Salant stood up to him. That he went in, but he went into Makam HaMikdash. So he answered, what do you mean? My rabbi, I relied on Louis Lowy. So he said, number one, we disagree with the Ravid. Most poskim disagree with the Ravid. Number two, even according to the Ravid, there's an Isser Torah, just as no Karis, but there's an Isser Torah. So by the way, right now, the Ravid you can learn 3 ways. Louis Lowy learned, Papashas, mutter. The Ravid means mutter to go with. Then we saw, that there's an Isser, but within that, we saw 2 Oifanim, one that there's an Isser Torah, and one that there's an Isser De Rabbanan. Okay. And because Shmuel Salant stood up to him, therefore, he does whatever Reb Shmuel Salant wants. Look at the concluding line. From here we should learn, no chanifa. Even if you're dealing with someone as tall and mighty like a cedar, you stand up to power, they're going to love you even more. What's the common denominator between these two sources? These two sources, it's not the rabbi saying it's nothing. The rabbis are saying it's something. And Reb Shmuel Salant is in his face, and he's telling him this is not okay. And in the other source, and he's remorseful, and he's doing tshuva, and kibal alav esadin. Now, you don't have a mention of nidui here. I'm not going to use that as evidence that there was no nidui. Sometimes you don't mention every detail. It's not like I'm not going to say that that's evidence that there was no nidui. But what I do think from what you do have from here is you have these two sources that are telling us that it wasn't as simple as a story. There was much more tension that was going on. So essentially right now, we have 2 narratives. Essentially now we have 2 narratives. We have one narrative in where the rabbis are not too concerned. It's not really a big deal. Only one mishugana, or maybe a few, are upset, but everyone else is happy, and Montefiore is happy, and everyone's happy. Or, no, this is a crisis. This is a communal crisis. A lot of people are upset about this, and the rabbis are in his face about this. These are 2 different narratives that we have. And as we'll move along, I think we'll continue getting closer to the truth. But the main thing I want to do right now, the next part, is actually talk about when did the story happen. Because on the one hand, we saw these sources talking about 1867. I adjusted that to 1866 because Montefiore didn't go in 1867. But then I showed you someone saying that a rabbi who died in 1861 was involved in the story. Okay, there's more information here about the timing. There's a Jew by the name of Ludwig Frankel. Ludwig Frankel was a Maskil Jew. In 1856, he went to Eretz Yisrael. He did not regard himself as a Shomer Torah mitzvah, and he wrote an account about his trip. This account he wrote in German. He was from Vienna. So he wrote this account in German. In 1858 is when the book was published, again, about a trip he made in 1856. And later, 2 years later, in 1860, it was translated into Hebrew under the title of Yerushalayim. And he writes over there about his whole trip going in, that he went. He went onto Har Habayis because he doesn't care. So he went in onto Har Habayis. Now, while he's writing this account, he says that the Sir Moses Montefiore, nothing stopped him from going onto the Heichal and from going forward all the way till the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He was there after 1,500 years of since the last Jew stood on the place, in the place where the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol would be there on Yom Kippur. Here you have someone writing about his journey in 1858, and he's saying that Montefiore preceded him, because he says Montefiore was the first one. So in other words, he's writing about himself as the second one, or whatever. He doesn't say he's the second, but he says it's after. So clearly Montefiore's story was before 1858, and that's going to allow us to understand that this happened in 1855, if I recall correctly, which is when we know that was the nearest trip that Montefiore went to Eretz Yisrael. The bottom line is it was before Hershenson was born. Hershenson was born in 1857. The story, I don't doubt that he remembered Montefiore's coming the sixth time. But what he could not remember was the time that Montefiore actually went up onto Har Habayis. That's something that happened in the mid-1850s and something that occurred before he was born. Okay, but we still have our most important question is that what happened? What actually happened? And what was the attitude? What was the temperature on the street? Did the nida happen? Did not? We still do not have clarity. And now we're going to move toward what appears to be more reliable sources that get us closer to the people who were directly involved, or at least the time. So, number one, the time. Rabbi Nachum Mandel Reicher, he published a book in 1866 called Sharei Yerushalayim. So it's about 10 years after the event. And he tells us the story. He says that there's a makam in the Beis HaMikdash, the place of the Beis HaMikdash is very holy by the Arabs, by the Muslims. And therefore they don't allow anyone to go in. That's true. For many centuries, the Muslims did not allow non-Muslims to enter Har Habayis. However, he says, the Sar Moshe Montefiore was the first Jew from the time of the Churban until now who actually went into Makam HaMikdash. There's very striking language, very similar language to Ludwig Frankel. And he goes on to say that Pizar Mammon Rav, that he spent a lot of money, and he got permission from the Sultan in Turkey, the Turkish Sultan. And he had to pay off the Pasha, that's the Sultan's representative in Yerushalayim. And he had to bring with him Anshe Chayil. And he had to pay off other Muslims with a lot of matanos. And va'asa neged rasen kol haYehudim asher b'Yerushalayim. All the Jews in Yerushalayim were against this. Ki hisru b'ay, and they warned him, she'asar l'zar likanas Hashem, that a zar is not allowed to go into certain areas of the Beis HaMikdash. And even areas where Yisrael could go, but b'zman hazeh kolanu tmei mesim. So we're tmei mesim, so we can't, the other areas that we can't go. V'yash alei chadasa, it's wrong, you can't go. But he went anyway. All right. Then he says, this building is where the Arabs pray. And he says, the Bavai Nisenu Arabim, this was a place where the Kohen Gadol would only go once a year, but now you have impurity there. Shoimu Shamai. Notice the second parallel between his writing here and Ludwig Frankel, talking about the Yom Kippur and the Kohen Gadol. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. But either way, here you have writing from around 10 years after the event, he's clearly upset at Montefiore. And he tells us the whole community was upset at Montefiore. Does he mention anything of a nidui? If there were a nidui, him you would expect to say. He's trying to describe how bad it was. He's trying to tell us how there was an uproar. He doesn't mention anything of a nidui, which really now forces us to really ask the question whether indeed a nidui did occur. But on the other hand, the idea of a communal uproar and collective bregus against Moses Montefiore, that very much you see from this particular text. Now what we could do over here is from the following account, we could actually hear the voice through somebody, assuming this account is accurate, and it does come across as accurate, of Rabbi Shmuel Salant. Rabbi Shmuel Salant was one of the main Rabbanim in Yerushalayim at this time. And we had a story that happened in 1887. 1887 is long after this Maisa. But what happened was as follows. The Baron Edmund Rothschild went to Eretz Yisrael that year. He was supporting many of the Chovevei Tzion initiatives in Eretz Yisrael. And he went up onto Temple Mount. And so Yaakov Goldman is a journalist, and he's writing about this in the Hatzfira newspaper, which comes out in Warsaw. And he writes about Rothschild going up, and then he says that he started talking to the Shmuel Salant about what Rothschild just did. And he says, as I was talking to Shmuel Salant, I also mentioned that Montefiore, the Tzaddik Montefiore, he also went up to Makam HaMikdash. And according to some Ziknei Yerushalayim, the Chacham and the Rabbanim of the city were so upset that Amru L'Nadoisai. So they were about to, but there was real talk about a Nidui. Says Reb Shmuel Salant, according to this report, Sheker Dvar Nidui. This is incorrect. It's a lie. It's not true. Says Reb Shmuel Salant. However, Zoaf Oz Leiv HaCharedim Al Asar. It is true. Everyone was upset. No one had the gall to tell him. And the rabbi for the Sfardim at that time, Tafresh Yud Zayin, says the year was 1857. Okay, it's again, I'm pretty sure it was 1856 or 1855. That particular 1855, that particular journey. But anyway, the rabbi at the time was Chesnon Aleph, Chaim Nissen Abulafia. Remember, we already heard about him. We heard that he was the rabbi at that time. And the Menal, the Eda Ashkenazis, his name was Yeshaya Brodki. But they couldn't bring themselves to tell him anything. They couldn't. They couldn't do it. However, the next day, Dr. Lowy came to my house, Reb Shmuel Salant says, and I told him about it. I'm like, what happened? Why'd you guys go on to Temple Mount? So he says, what do you mean? There's no Kedushas Habayis today. There's no Beis HaMikdash. There's no Kedushas Habayis. So I brought him a Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, and I showed him the Magen Avram and Siman Tov Kuf Samach Aleph brings the Shita of the Rambam that the Kedusha, the first Kedusha still pertains today, and therefore all the dinim still apply today. So Lowy tells me, but the Ravid disagrees. And today we can rely on the Ravid. I don't know exactly what that means. Today we can rely on, but this is what he said. He said, today we can rely on the Ravid. Says Reb Shmuel Salant, I responded, that's a mistake. Everyone agrees that at Midrabanan, you're not allowed to go. Meaning even the Ravid agrees that Midrabanan this is. So remember, within the Ravid, we saw maybe the Araisa, maybe the Rabbanan, and according to this account, the Rabbanan. Okay, so now Louis Lowy comes around and he says, I made a mistake. But I thought, the MS is, even if I would have told Montefiore that you can't go, he wouldn't have listened because he wanted to go. And so it was better that I don't say anything because we have this concept of mutav sheyu shogegin va'al yu mizidin. So maybe that's why I didn't tell him. So Reb Shmuel Salant does not accept this either, and he says this too is a mistake because he thought it was a mitzvah. He thought it's a mitzvah to go up to the Makam HaMikdash. And if he knew that this was prohibited according to the din, then definitely he would not have gone up. And Shmuel Salant continues according to this account and says that after the story, Montefiore regretted this. And in fact, when I was in London, Reb Shmuel Salant says, in the year 1860, I heard from the chief rabbi of England, Nathan Marcus Adler, that he spoke to Montefiore, and Montefiore told him that he regrets it, he thought it was a mitzvah, and he's very upset about what he had done. So what's noteworthy about this account is, again, it does no nidui. Rav Shmuel Salant is saying there was no nidui. Even the idea that there was about to be a nidui, he says, no, never happened. There was no discussion of a nidui. But what you also get over here, Montefiore is not confronted. No one tells Montefiore anything. And I know we had accounts earlier saying that they told him and they stood up to him and they told him in his face. According to this account, no one told him anything, which kind of makes sense. If you know the dynamics of Montefiore and coming to Eretz Yisrael, no one told him anything. But at the same time, this idea that it was a nothing burger and that no one really cared and it was a few kanoim or crazy people who were upset. No, both of these accounts tell us the entire community was upset. Even this account in that Surah News, the entire community was upset. And also notice here, is there any reference in any of these sources to them going up in a hot air balloon or a cold air balloon or whatever it is. No, there's no reference to Shita Teva or Migdal whatsoever. And likewise, this idea about building a Beis Hamikdash, which someone threw in, that maybe they went up to build a Beis Hamikdash, there's no evidence in anywhere that this was on the table then. There was a story in the 1830s that we spoke about when we spoke about Kalisher. Kalisher Taka wanted to build a Beis Hamikdash or to buy the area of the Beis Hamikdash. That was Taka a plan that would have been reasonable during those years. We spoke about then how there was a change in government, etc. But no evidence for that over here. Now, so I think we kind of made a case that really, if you want to ask the story, what happened over there, it's somewhere in the middle. It's somewhere in the middle. On the one hand, like the Nidui, which is very serious, that seems not to have been. But on the other hand, the communal outrage does seem to have been, but at the same time, no one kind of tells Montefiore directly. It is an indirect conversation that happens with Louis Lowy, and then ultimately Montefiore, according to this account at least, does regret it, and that kind of seems to be the picture over here. But all of this is only going to be strengthened when we look at non-Jewish sources that talk about this story. So the English consul in Yerushalayim at this time, his name is James Finn. And he has a book, and his wife has a book. They were both there. They were there from 1845 to 1863, covering these years, and they were very involved in philanthropy to the Jewish community. So they were integrated at the same time, maybe her especially, maybe some missionary attempts as it relates to the Jewish community. So they both have accounts that are written. So Elizabeth Ann Finn, her book is called Reminiscence. She has a few books, but this one is called Reminiscence of Mrs. Finn. This one was published in 1929. She dictated orally these stories, and then they were typed up. Now, very clearly, the year here is 1855. As I said before, that was the year of that trip. That's the time that Rothschild made a trip. So they're very clearly talking, both of them, about the year Montefiore made the trip. I'm getting mixed up. I probably did it a few times already. That Montefiore made a trip, 1855. So he says like this. She writes like this. On the 20th of July, there arrived Sir Moses and Lady Montefiore, whom we met as old friends. In other words, every time they came to Israel, so Montefiore is from England, so obviously they're getting together. Sir Moses brought a firman with him. A firman is a Turkish decree, basically, because he had seen the Sultan, and basically it's a gzeira from the Sultan that says he can do whatever he wants, which was publicly read in Jerusalem in presence of Sir Moses and Mr. Finn in uniform, the Pasha, that's the Sultan's representative in Yerushalayim, and all the notable standing. And at the end, the Pasha led in a declaration of loyal submission. So basically then there's a whole formal ceremony over here. Okay, now I'm buttle to you. Good. On the 26th of July, Sir Moses and his party were admitted to the temple sanctuary in obedience to the firman. So basically, because they have this firman, either it said they could go to Temple Mount, or it said you do whatever he wants, and so by definition he could go to Temple Mount, and so he invokes that privilege. We escorted them, says Elizabeth Ann. It was very early in the morning, soon after sunrise. Sir Moses did me the honor to escort me. So he was going with me. And as we ascended the steps of the platform, he repeated, so there are steps over there going up to the platform, he repeated in Hebrew verses from the 121st Psalm, one of the songs of degrees, Shir HaMalos, that is steps, which the priests were believed to have sung as they ascended the steps. So there is an association between Shir HaMalos, Shir HaMalos, and these steps, because there's 15 of them in Tehillim. There were 15 steps in the Beis HaMikdash, and Rashi tells us the Leviim stood on those steps and they sang the Shir HaMalos. I don't know if there's a source that says that the Kohanim, when they would go up, would say these. It's also interesting, he said 121, that's Shir HaMalos Es HaEinai. So maybe from all the Shir HaMalos, that's the one he knows the best. And so he says this. That's a touching moment. Thence we entered the Dome of the Rock, and then she goes on to say how they went all over here. They're Yom of a Tzafain of a Kem of a Negba, all over the Temple Mount. She describes for 3 pages everything that happened over there, but for our purposes, we got enough. It's very clear from this account. He's not in some Shida Teva Umigdal. Okay, now let's hear James' voice. James, his book was published in 1878. It's called Stirring Times. Volume 2, pages 328 to 331 is where he discusses this matter. On the 26th of July, as the same date, by the way, it was right after Tisha B'Av, if I recall correctly, Sir Moses and Lady Montefiore were admitted to the temple sanctuary by the Pasha. The party consists only of Sir Moses and Lady Montefiore with their friends and attendants, and with myself, my wife, and our vice consul from Haifa, Mr. Rogers, and his sister, Miss Rogers, and 2 Jewish interpreters, one attached to my consulate. So in other words, as the English consulate, he always had someone who could speak in Hebrew to the Jews. So he had that interpreter, and the official interpreter of the chief rabbi. That's very interesting. So there's an official interpreter of the chief rabbi who basically could speak Arabic or whatever it is and converse with the non-Jews. Both present out of respect for Sir Moses Montefiore. So, if I'm understanding correctly, the Rabbanim, who are going to be really upset at Montefiore for doing this, they probably don't know, but their interpreter that day, who they kind of for the trip said, "Oh, you're going to hang out with Montefiore," their interpreter is going on to Har Habayis according to this account. We once more beheld the majestic rock. Now, what does he mean here by once more? Once more, James Finn is a Christian. Christians were not allowed on Temple Mount for centuries. For centuries. It was that year, in 1855, a few months earlier, that a few dignitaries from Europe came and the Sultan let them go up, together with James Finn. And so that's what he means here, once again. We beheld the majestic rock. That's the rock that some say is the Even HaShasiyah. We visited the cave, noticed all the glorious features of this unrivaled site, and then passed on to the Aqsa Mosque. Okay, then he describes over there how they took a drink of water from a well that's there. Finally, the Pasha caused carpets to be spread on the great platform under the small dome of the chain, which is one of the structures there, for the party to sit. And we rested while conversing on intensely interesting associations and reminiscence of the place. Okay, so, no Shida Tevo Migdal. Okay, this time, strange to say, that verse comments on here what happens is, in her account, there's nothing about the reaction of the Jewish community. But James tells us the reaction of the Jewish community. This time, strange to say, that verse comments on the event came from the rabbinical Jews resident in Jerusalem. Okay, what he means this time. The prior 2 times when he went with Christian dignitaries from Europe, Muslims on Temple Mount gave them a hard time. This time, they write, no one had any problem with it. No, none of the Muslims on Temple Mount had any problem with Moses Montefiore. But the Jews did. The Jews did. They hold, as has already been mentioned, very strong views as to the danger of dishonoring the holy law by inadvertence in walking over the place where it is hidden away. Here, Chidushim. You want ready for Chidushim from Mr. Finn? Why not let it go on Har Habayis? Because you could walk in the area where the holy law, meaning the Luchas Habris, in the Aron is concealed. You're not allowed to walk on top of the Aron. That's the first reason you're not allowed to go on Temple Mount. Also, as to the unlawfulness of entering the sanctuary before it has been ceremoniously cleaned from pollution by the Gentiles. There's another Isser here. That is, Asr likanes, let's codify this now in Hebrew. Asr likanes lamakam hamikdosh lifnei chanukas habayis. That's halacha aleph. Halacha beis. Asr lidroich me'al makam ha'aron. These are 2 halachas, 2 chidushim from Mr. James Finn. Okay, something was lost in translation. And some of them expressed their disapproval in unmeasured terms on hearing what had occurred. Unmeasured terms. So this was an uproar. Now what is unmeasured? I don't know exactly what unmeasured terms means, but it's enough to build a narrative over here that the community was upset. And which is what we're seeing in all these places. Everyone was upset, and that you see is consistent pretty much throughout. Okay, so at this point we need to say, so then where did this Shidduch Tevel Migdal even come from? None of the early sources talk about the Shidduch Tevel Migdal. So Rabbi Aviner, when he proposed that idea, he said that he actually got that from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And here's Rabbi Ovadia Yosef's language in the Tshuva, Kimidumeli, I believe, Shashamati be'aldusi, that I heard in my childhood, Shahasar v'Rabbi, that Moses Montefiore and his teacher, Nichnasu l'makam ha'mikdash ha'idei shida tevel migdal shenasum goyim. So he's not sure. He says, I think I heard this. Now let me give you my theory of what happened over here. If you want a limud chus, what's the limud chus that we have right now? The Ravid. Okay, go explain that to people. Go explain that to a little child. Go explain to someone who doesn't have background. You're going to start explaining the Shitta, Kitchela Shaita, Kitchela Asalavid, the Rambam, and there's a Ravid. It's difficult. This is complicated. Easier thing. So, easier limud chus would be that he went in a Shitta. Now, it's not a crazy thing because many people saw him being carried from place to place in a sedan, which was with the wealthy people in the 19th century. They would have been carried by people carrying them. So it's not an outlandish thing to suggest, and it served a function. What was the function? The function is Jews wanted to remember Montefiore well. If you want to remember him well, you need a limud zchus for this event. What would the limud zchus of this event say? Well, he went in like that. He thought that it would be mutter like that. It turns out it's not, but at least we can understand why he thought that way. And so that this kind of works better than saying the limud zchus was he thought that we passing like the ravid. And then that's probably how this idea came up. All right. Now the last text that we're going to read comes from the diaries of Sir Moses, a Lady Montefiore, published in 1890 by Louis Lowy. So after they both passed away, he published their diaries. Now here's a problem. He didn't publish them in full. He edited them, he put them out, he did a work based on the diaries. I don't know if the actual diaries have ever been published in full. So let's go to open 1855 and let's see what we have over there. And there's an entry for July 26th. And here this is what it says. They, meaning Moses and Lady Montefiore, received an invitation from the Pasha to see all the places held in veneration by Muslim, Christian, and Jew. Okay, that's called being intentionally ambiguous. They received an invitation to see all the places held in veneration by Muslim, Christian, and Jew. What are all the places held in veneration by all three of these? So, assuming it's one place, then it's only Har Habayis. Okay, the patriarch of the Greek, Armenian, and Latin covenants also invited them to visit their covenants. Oh, okay, so he got other invitations that day too. Sir Moses, however, was not able to accept them all. He had but one object in view in coming to Yerushalayim, which was to help the poor. So he doesn't have time for this. Okay, but notice, he doesn't say that he rejected them. He said, was not able to accept them all, implying that he accepted some of them. Okay, so what's happening over here? He's obfuscating very, very intentionally. He doesn't want to talk, Louis Lowy doesn't want to talk about the story that they went on Har Habayis and the problems associated. But he wants you to know that he was invited. So he tells you he kind of adapts the story that they were invited. But he doesn't lie. He doesn't say they didn't go. He, in fact, if you know the story and you read the passage, you can probably tell that they did go. He's being cautiously deliberate over here. He wants some people, if you know, so then you'll see it, but if you don't know, I don't want to rock the boat. And essentially, what's happening here is he wants to tell a certain story, and that's biasing how he's telling the story. And in fact, that's what I think is the larger theme of everything that we saw today. Why? Because here we saw one story that was told and retold by many, many people. And when you learn more about these people, and what their agendas were, you're going to see that the stories miraculously adapted to agendas. And this is a great lesson in life for stories. So let me take you back to not all the way to the beginning, but somewhat to the beginning. Remember we had Yehuda Noach Braver, and remember he said that the rabbis there said it's okay. Because even the Ravid, it's only Issa Darabanan, Issa Darabanan because of covet. So if you're going to honor the place, it's not a problem. And they were going to honor the place. So all the Rabbanim all agreed that it was fine. Okay, well, Rabbi Yehuda Noach Braver had a program. What was his program? He wanted that Jews should get from the British control of Har Habayis, and he wanted that we should build a Beis HaMedrash and a Beis HaKnesses on Har Habayis, and his contrast is dedicated to arguing why this is a great idea. So if that's your agenda, it makes a lot, and what's the point? The point is, you're not allowed to normally go up. But if you're going up to build a shul, and you're going to go up to learn in that shul, that's covet, so that's mutter. So that was his program. Well, the story miraculously danced around his particular program and became his program, number one. Then we had Reb Chaim Hirshenson. Reb Chaim Hirshenson, what did he do? If you remember, he didn't say the rabbis were matir, but he didn't say they asered either. In fact, he didn't have the rabbis saying anything. His father asered. And the largest theme of his story was that there was one nudnik who blew a shofar, who was not normal, who made a nidud. Okay, well, Reb Chaim Hirshenson, in this book, Malki Bakodesh, what he wants to do is say that l'chatchila it's mutter for everyone to go up to Har Habayis today. So if that's what your agenda is, why would you spend ink saying that Reb Shmuel Salant and other Rabbanim were against it? That's not your agenda, so you're not going to say that. And you have an incentive to highlight the fact that there was one Meshugana who blew a shofar, if that story even happened, but at least you have an incentive for telling that particular story. Eliezer ben Yehuda. Eliezer ben Yehuda loved the idea that a nidoy and a cherem are meaningless. And the idea that you would just laugh at it or laugh it off as if it's a nothing, that's something that spoke very much to him. In fact, a few years later, he himself was put in nidoy and cherem by the Rabbanim in Yerushalayim. So that story very much would have fit him. Let's go back to Rabbi Aviner in the beginning. Rabbi Aviner in the beginning, the same thing is happening. Because Rabbi Wiener, he wants to say that you're not allowed to go in a helicopter above the thing. Good. Now you want to say it with a story. So there's an incentive to say, oh yeah, Moses Montefiore, and everyone was upset at him, which is true. And he went in Shidduch Teva Migdal, which is probably not true. And so now there's a story that is fuel for something that he wants to say. So he has that incentive to kind of say that idea because that helps his particular agenda. We saw Rabbi Yaakov Chai Zarihan and we saw Rabbi Eisenbach. And they were talking about this confrontation of where the rabbis are in Montefiore's face and they're condemning him. And he's all remorseful and he's all sad and he's all upset or whatever. These are rabbis that wanted to forbid going onto Temple Mount. And so they have every incentive to highlight those particular details. Even as if you look back at the best sources, it doesn't look like that stuff happened. It doesn't look like that stuff happened. So based on all this, what could we walk away with? Obviously, it's impossible to know for sure. We don't have video footage and we can't put this on, slow-mo to actually see in slow motion what happened. But from all the sources, I'll tell you what my read here. Did Moses Montefiore go up to Har Habayis? Yes, he did in the summer of 1855. His rabbi told him it was okay, and yes, it revolved around the Ravid. His rabbi interpreted Ein Boi Kares means it's basically mutter today, and we're just going to follow the Ravid, and that was good. And together with the fact that my rabbi's not going to listen to me anyway, Montefiore is not going to listen to me anyway, so let's go ahead. So that happens. There's general outrage in the community. I think the sources are pretty clear on that. This idea, he broke a taboo. No one does this, which was right. No one had been doing that for as far back as anyone could remember. We even saw some language of no one has done this in 1,500 years. That we need to come back to, and maybe next week we'll actually discuss that, of what happened in prior centuries. So that's a candidate for a topic coming up. But there was outrage. There was outrage because this was not done. You want to use the word, even some people engage in unmeasured terms, whatever those is. Okay, that stuff that happened. No one confronted Montefiore, as far as we can tell. No one told him to his face this was a problem. However, Rabbi Salan did speak to Lowy, and by the way, even there was very respectful. The language over there was not anger and was no raising voices or anything like that, but he did speak to Lowy. Lowy presumably passes on to Montefiore, so Montefiore now finds out that there was a problem. I assume Montefiore regretted it. That's my assumption, knowing, reading a little bit about him. I assume he regretted it, which would make sense that he then tells the chief rabbi in England that he regrets it, and that's the story. That's the story. So if you agree with me about the way the stories seem to get adapted per people's agendas, then I think this, beside for good learning in terms of an important sugya and an interesting story, I think it also is a tremendous lesson in how we all retell stories and how we listen to stories as well. And I think a lot could be said in that regard, but I'll leave it at that. Okay.